has a board of directors and a president. And they do economic studies of their particular region, and they collect statistics, financial statistics and banking statistics from their particular region, and that's about the only functions they have at the present time. That was not the original concept of the Federal Reserve System. The Federal Reserve System was originally established precisely in order to allow the various regions of the country to have somewhat varying monetary policies. But it all gradually got centered in the Federal Reserve Board in Washington, D.C., which originally was just supposed to be a kind of coordinating mechanism and an accounting mechanism for the Federal Reserve System. All monetary policy is now set by the Federal Reserve Board and by the Open Market Committee, which does have representatives of the regional banks on it. The Federal Reserve Board does not have representatives of the regional banks. The members of the Federal Reserve Board are appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate of the United States. And all monetary policy is now, as I said, is now centered in the Federal Reserve Board. If this were a course in money and banking, I would go on in much greater length about the Federal Reserve System's history, but I'm not going to do that. I'm simply going to tell you in a very summary fashion how it operates now. There are various ways in which the Federal Reserve Board affects interest rates. One is its discount rate. In other words, the banks members of the Federal Reserve Board, not all banks are members of the Federal Reserve Board, although all large and medium-sized banks are. There are some small local banks that are not members. All member banks of the Federal Reserve Board have an input in terms of their region. We would like to have lower interest rates because we're in a recession and things are getting out of hand with reference to certain areas, so perhaps rates should be higher and whatnot. All of this is processed by the board, which has a large core of economic, financial, and monetary analysts who report to it. The regional banks can go to the board for funds for their member banks, and the member banks can go to the board, to the discount window as it's called, to get loans at the rate that the Federal Reserve Board, the discount rate that they have declared for a particular period of time. It also can raise or lower the reserve requirements for banks, and that has an effect also on interest rates. If the reserve requirements are raised, banks will try to compensate for that by raising interest rates, or it will try to compensate for a lowering of reserve requirements by lowering interest rates. And that's another way in which the Federal Reserve Board affects interest rates. At the present time, the Federal Reserve Board basically simply sets the interest rates for the economic system of the country with reference to the bills, notes, and bonds that the United States government issues, and which are purchased by the public, purchased by foreign governments, purchased by banks, purchased by individuals and institutions both in the United States and outside the United States. And the Federal Reserve System is the buyer of last resort for these instruments of public indebtedness of the U.S. government, by doing that, it sets interest rates. It sells bonds to the banks. It buys bonds from the banks. If it sells bonds to the banks, that causes interest rates to go down. If it buys bonds from the bank, causes interest rates to go up, etc., etc. So right now, and for a long time, interest rates in the United States have been extremely low and held very low by the Federal Reserve Board, both in the contemporary board and by the previous board, which is headed by Alan Greenspan. This was undoubtedly one of the main reasons why the housing bubble took place, because people were able to borrow at very low rates. They can still borrow at very low rates if they can borrow at all, because now the banks are not making these loans with anywhere near the abandon that they did. So Chairman Greenspan kept interest rates much too low for much too long a time, and this led to a misallocation of capital in the housing sector as well as in a number of other sectors. Keep in mind that this is the way it operates in the United States. It's a particularly messy process, although it is much more centralized than it was at the beginning. And at this point, as I say, the regional banks really are data collection and processing centers more than anything else. All countries of the world have central banks. They all do things which affect interest rates in the countries. Some interfere more than others. Some allow the market to set interest rates more than other countries do that interfere less. At any rate, in a totally free market in which there was no central bank, the interest rate would simply be set by the market, by the play of supply and demand. And of course, the play of supply and demand still affects the market for credit, even when the central bank is imposing a particular interest rate, just as the supply and demand for a commodity affects how the markets operate, even if a price controls are established by the government or subsidies are declared by the government. In other words, what the government's affecting or setting a price for money has the same kind of effect on the financial markets as setting a price for, let's say, oil would have on the oil markets in the United States, or any other product, or agricultural price supports have on the agricultural market in the United States, and so on. And this also, of course, affects foreign countries as well, and their policies with reference to credit and the financial system and the monetary system also affect us. So we will now go into the actual subject matter of the course of this class. Let me mention that I'm perfectly happy to receive email questions and comments from you, even though the class will basically be over today. I hope that some of you will be taking the course on economic statecraft next semester, but whether you do or not, I certainly will be more than delighted to hear from you in future. And if you have a particular question with reference to a particular matter that we have discussed in class, or something that we have not discussed in class that you would like to have me comment on to you. While we're at it, let me just mention, as I have before, a particular article in The Economist. And again, I urge you, if you're interested in economic matters, subscribe to The Economist and subscribe to the Financial Times. This is in the issue of November 24th, page 50. It's called The Urge to Smurf. It's an interesting article because it has to do with internal smuggling. And that's smuggling of cigarettes from Virginia to states, pardon me, to states in the Northeast, such as New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, where cigarette taxes are much higher than they are in Virginia. So the same pack of cigarettes that costs X in Virginia costs X plus Y in the other states of the Northeast, and the Y is a very large differential. So, enterprising, if illegal business people, buy large quantities of cigarettes in Virginia, transport them by truck to the states of the Northeast, and sell them there, mostly through gas stations. So this is a very big business. It's cost billions of dollars every year. Anybody who has access to a gas station in the Northeast is a fool if they smoke. Well, they're fools if they smoke, period. But if they smoke and buy cigarettes, they're fools if they buy them at a regular shop rather than going to a gas station and getting smuggled cigarettes from Virginia at a much lower price. Why is it? You would think that this would be easy to control. The problem is the same problem that you have and which we've discussed before, trying to legislate people's preferences and how people operate when they want to consume something and they want to get good quality at the lowest possible price. Or they want to get a commodity they can't get at all legally, they will go to the illegal market, as in the case of narcotic drugs. In the case of cigarettes, the sale is legal, of course, but why pay X plus Y when you can get the same commodity for X? And these aren't rip-offs. These are not fake cigarettes. These aren't phony Winstons and Marlboros and so on. These are the real thing. These are genuine Marlboros and Winstons and other cigarette brands. So you're getting the same quality at a substantially lower price. And the let's say a police official or some kind of fiscal official of the state of New York goes to a gas station and says, "How much are you selling those cigarettes for?" The person behind the counter will say, "Well, we're selling them at the official price, whatever it is per carton," and so on and so forth. So what you have to do is get undercover people who don't go as officials of the government, and they claim to be just simply buying cigarettes and say, "How much is that?" And the person tells them, and then they flash their badge and say, "You're under arrest," or whatever the case may be. And some judge fines them $500 or $1,000, and the next day or two they're right back in business. It's impossible. Can't be done. And that's why that's a perfect example of governments trying to regulate something that can't be regulated, and also the effect of differential tax regimes in different parts of the country, as well as in different countries, among different countries. For example, there are states in the United States that have no state income tax. There's no doubt that those states have attracted residents because they have no state income tax. There are countries in the world that have lower tax rates than other countries, and they attract businesses that either have genuine operations in that country or claim to have operations in that country, at least have offices in that country, so that they can apply a lower tax burden to their sales. Many corporations in the United States, for example, maintain the profits from their sales abroad. They maintain those profits abroad. So we have trillions of dollars that are in corporate coffers in other countries that aren't brought to the United States, because if they're brought to the United States, they will be taxed in the United States as U.S. income. All of these, I'm going into all of this in some detail because I want you to go away with many basic principles of economic theory, of course, but also with various practical knowledge of how things actually operate in the real world, because you are going to have to apply that reality to the theory and apply the theory to the reality, because they are interconnected in all kinds of complex ways, and they affect each other. You cannot avoid the laws of economics. You can only skew them or violate them or pervert them. They will fight back. Just as if you jump out a window, the law of gravity will see to it that you pay for that. Now, if you jump out the window with a parachute, the law of gravity will be less punishing than if you don't have the parachute, but it will still have an effect on you, and it will be a negative effect. It may be that for some reason you find personal satisfaction in jumping out of windows, and it may be that you find that people find, and they do find, non-economic satisfaction in taking non-economic actions. And one of the very important non-economic motivations, of course, in the part of politicians and government officials, is to increase their power. And one of the ways they try to do that is by pleasing various groups in society, by providing subsidies, by imposing price controls, by manipulating interest rates, and by many other actions which cause markets to operate less efficiently and less effectively than they would otherwise. Okay. You may say, and a lot of people do say, well, we can't have an entirely unregulated market. Unfortunately, that's probably correct. You cannot have a totally unregulated market because the governments involved won't allow you to. That's not the proper question. The proper question is, should there be a totally unregulated market? Much of the regulations that are put into effect by government, and in the case of the United States and most other advanced countries, the regulations cover thousands of pages because once economic policy is made into law, the law is then implemented by regulations by the different departments of government. And in recent years, particularly this administration has had an absolute huge increase in the number of regulations that it's been putting out, covering all kinds of different things. And the Health Care Act is going to, which is an incredible piece of legislation, is going to result in thousands of pages of regulations. And that's only one law among many, although it's one of the worst. And this all has a cost. It has an economic cost. Regulations are put into place ostensibly to protect people from predators, to protect people from fraud, to protect people from themselves. We think you shouldn't do this because it's bad for you. But I want to do it. Well, we don't care. We don't want you to do it, so we're going to make it illegal. But I'm not hurting anybody else. Doesn't matter. Mayor Bloomberg of New York is famous for this. He's saying there's too much sugar in soft drinks, there's too much trans fats in everything, so the city of New York passes legislation annoying drugstores and supermarkets and other places of business saying they can sell this but they can't sell that, so on and so forth, and interfering with the markets. Individuals want to do certain things, and if they're not hurting other people, why shouldn't they be able to do so? In other words, the answer to regulations is to have decent laws to protect people from sociopaths and psychopaths, fraudsters, people who prey on other people. They should be arrested, they should be prosecuted, they should be jailed or fined or both. No question about it. But that's a far cry from the great majority of the regulations that are issued by the hundreds every year, leading to a corpus of thousands and tens of thousands of regulations of the federal government. And remember, the state governments are doing the same thing, the county governments are doing the same thing, the municipal governments are doing the same thing. We've mentioned New York City, but it's true also of every other city in the country. So you have not only the thousands of pages of regulations of the U.S. government, federal government, but also the state, local, and county governments in all of the 50 states. And all of this regulatory activity interferes with the market, and all of it, as a result, has an economic cost. And that cost is borne by the public. This cost is borne by individuals, organizations, corporations, banks, professional societies, trade associations, etc., etc., etc. Everybody in society pays for it, either because they have to pay a higher price for things because of the interference with the market, or because they have to pay higher taxes for the purpose, among other things, of policing all these regulations, so that the effect of all of this is to add to the budgetary pressures, to cause large deficits, to cause an ever-increasing debt burden, and eventually the kind of crisis that they're having at the present time in Europe, which has gone even farther down the path of a regulatory state than the United States so far, although we're rapidly catching up. The fact is that the productive process, which we discussed several class sessions ago, is the only thing which provides the resources by which society is able to function. The degree to which that process is interfered with in a negative fashion or in a positive fashion, remember, it's just as bad to have subsidies as to have price controls. The extent to which the productive process is interfered with, it will work less well. The degree to which it works less well will mean that society will have less access to economic assets and to an appropriate economic